Hey everybody, my name is Aaron Gore, Vice President of Sales and Marketing for the Fifth Ingredient and Vice President and co-founder of the American Craft Beer Hall of Fame, and welcome to another Craft University webinar. Where today, as you can tell, my voice is a little gone, so we're very fortunate to have somebody who is an absolute expert in the field of tech use in breweries, the man who built Beer 30 himself, talking about not just actual software tools, but the entire tech stack and the use of it and how to manage that within your space in a way that is additive and not disruptive. So, with that in mind, this is Digital Discipline Best Practices for Managing Text Use in Breweries. I'm going to turn it over to my friend, the CEO and founder of the Fifth Ingredient, Pulkit K. Agrawal. Pulkit, how you doing today? And the stage is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. Great to be here, everybody. My name is Pulkit K. Agrawal. I am the founder and CEO of the Fifth Ingredient, and I'm so excited to get into this conversation today about digital discipline, best practices for managing tech use in breweries. So let's just start off real quick with the agenda for today. We're going to be getting into an introduction, getting into utilizing technology for brewery data management software, streamlining profitability using data, which is going to be one of my favorite parts about this. Key takeaways, questions, and discussions. One of the things I absolutely love and encourage is feel free to throw questions into the chat. I can talk for a full hour, but it's always fun to have interactive questions, pieces from people in the audience. So just go in the chat, just type something in, and we'll be able to address things from there. So let's get started, just diving on the introduction. So I studied at Harvard University, mechanical engineering, moved to San Diego to work at Ballast Point Brewing as a process engineer. That's really where I got started in the entire craft beer industry and really learned everything on the actual production packaging side, filtration, nitrogen beer, and really focus in on that side of the business. And then about 8 years ago, I started the Fifth Ingredient. The idea being you have your four ingredients in beer: water, malt, hops, yeast. Fifth ingredient is data. So how can we help breweries use their data for better proactive predictive process improvement? At this point, there are 12 different offerings that we have when it comes to the fifth ingredient. Always happy to chat more about this. I was also part of Forbes 30 Under 30 Food and Drink 2023. So throughout the seminar, webinar, we're going to be talking a bit about just the Beer 30 concept as a whole. So I just want to quickly preface of what is Beer 30, and this is really not designed to be a sales pitch at all, but really focusing on what's happening from a technology side. So Beer 30, brewery data management system, grain to glass data tracking, focus on purchasing raw materials and package supplies, brew, ferment, filter, bright tank package, COGS, profit analysis, sales and distro, accounting, point of sale integration, feature demand planning, and even things like TTB reports. Key here, everything is modular and tier price. You also see I'm wearing an amazing Beer 30 light tank top. So that is one of our newest offerings that we just rolled out for Craft CBC last week, Craft Brewers Conference in Philly. If you're interested in checking out Beer 30 Light, feel free to shoot us a note as well. Starts as low as $30 a month. So with that, let's actually get into the utilizing technology for brewery data management software. And the way I really like thinking about this is if you're watching this, there's a project that you've created about using something regarding technology that you want to track from start to finish. And the cool thing about tracking technology and managing tech use, it's effectively a project that you want to implement at your brewery. And the way that I'm going to approach this today is actually looking at it from the mindset of how do we empower employees to take that initiative? How do we empower them to be project owners? And what do we do in terms of actually getting those employees who are just doing a job versus taking ownership? Right? The whole premise for today is the managing tech use is really a viable solution when you actually have it implemented in a position where those employees feel like they're taking ownership and really tracking that data in order to keep things going on a step-by-step basis. So with that, when we talk about projects in general, there can be a whole laundry list. It could be implementing your point of sale. It could be brewery management softwares. It could be any other initiatives such as a Siemens PLC, or it could be getting into the hardware side, Seno sensors, Plato sensors, etc. So there's a lot that can happen from a technology side. And the best practice here is to really understand what is the highest priority? And the cool thing about this is that sometimes your employees will come to you with an initiative that they want to take on. We see that all the time at breweries that really emphasize that idea of, hey, the manager will be looking at this with an open mind, right? And it's super important to really focus in on that because otherwise you may just inevitably demoralize the employee, and that's not going to be great for anybody. So, with that in mind, what I like to think about are 10 steps for implementing software tech. Number one, define the problems that you're trying to solve. Again, priority matters quite a bit. Define success and make sure you can measure it. Understand the solutions in the market and the features required at your brewery. This is critical. Due diligence matters, right? Anything software tech related. And if you're managing tech use, understanding what's in the market is very, very critical, and making sure you don't get into analysis paralysis. Understand the usability or impact across all departments and teams. This is very critical when it comes to things like tablet, mobile, laptop friendliness. So we'll chat more about that as we continue. Understanding the onboarding timeline and processes, getting into defining budget and understanding the contract terms and conditions, calculating the ROI on the project, getting the leadership and team buy-in. If you're doing anything when it comes to tech usage at a brewery, you need to make sure that not only are the leaders all bought in, but all of the different employees are also feeling that particular buy-in as well. Having a go live date, getting into timeline for training and implementation, and then getting into SOP changes as the final step, celebrating project wins, ingraining usage, and doing root cause analysis when things don't work out. So let's tackle these 10 steps one at a time. So that way, everybody on the call in this webinar can really understand how the takeaway of leaving here today with better managing tech usage becomes very critical. So let's start off with number one. Each brewery is different and needs to be treated this way. That's kind of one of the big premises of this case study. Keep in mind, trying to implement change can be hard, and it's okay. Make sure you select a project manager and plan out who in the team is going to be involved. That's very critical when it comes to something like tech usage. And again, this is a guideline that can apply for most data management projects. This is not the source of truth. This is meant to be a way for having a guideline for you to then adjust at your actual brewery and see how to utilize that for tech usage. So define the problem that you're trying to solve. If you're attending this webinar, you know that one of the biggest pieces of managing tech use, as an example, hey, we need to implement a brewery data management software. And with that, what's the problem of doing something like that? Why do you care about this? Well, there's probably a lot of disjointed information. There's multiple data entry that's happening based on paper logs, whiteboards, spreadsheets, and maybe there's a bunch of redundant data entry that's happening. There could be a huge lacking of a single source of truth. Your teams aren't communicating, right? Think of it like this, where when you have tech usage, we have all been there, text messages, end of shift emails, responses 2 to 3 days later. When you have a tank that's having issues, you want to be in a position where there's getting real-time alerts and communication, not waiting 2 or 3 days for a response. These problems then lead to uninformed business decisions. You get into a position where you're not actually recognizing the trends before it's too late. And there could also be ways and hours that are being wasted tracking down issues from either quality issues, cost of goods sold issues, etc. Those are all so critical when it comes to managing tech use, because this is what you go to your team with. These are the problems we're trying to solve. This is why we're going to have new technology at our brewery and getting into the best practices with that. As we dive in on that, the other pieces that I always like talking about, lack of visibility. If you don't have the correct tools in place, inventory, brews in production and process, quality control, cost of goods sold, sales, tax compliance, they're all going to take a hit. And this is where it becomes so critical to be able to really understand the first topic, what's the problem you want to solve, and why are you introducing technology into your brewery? Number two, define success and make sure you can measure it. Make sure to set targets and goals with breakdowns of what success is. One of the biggest things, if you're looking at adopting technology use in your brewery, don't let perfection be the enemy of innovation. I'll reiterate that. don't let perfection be the enemy of innovation, right? We're in such a powerful time here where we are able to actually try out different experiments and see what happens. Just because it's not perfect out of the gate, it's okay. Having some sort of metrics of, hey, we're implementing new technology, what does that look like, is so critical. When it comes to something like brewery software, streamlined brew sheets, paper logs, whiteboards could be that 50% threshold. The 80% threshold could be something like, hey, we need to be able to make purchase orders, sales orders, calculate our cost of goods sold. And then the final 100% could be things like accounting integration with QuickBooks Online or Xero. So again, you're piecemealing this to make sure that everything ends up being from a success side and really breaking down what's happening piece by piece. Step number 3, understand the solutions in the market and features required at your brewery. This is one of the core concepts when it comes to point solution versus full stack solutions, where really a point solution focuses on one key area versus a full stack solution, which focuses on the entire process. So let me give you some examples, because even as you're looking at this tech usage and that digital discipline, it's so critical to come back to this every single time. Point solution. This is something that's very department specific. It could be things like, I'm using Brew Planner for scheduling. I'm creating recipes in Beersmith or Brewer's Friend or Brewfather. I'm using Draft Lab for sensory. I'm using Barrel IT for barrel management, keg tracking through Keg ID, Keg Shoe, Keg Star, Convoy. Brew process and quality, maybe I'm just using Beer 30 and Beer 30 Light for the process and quality side. Lab tech, maybe it's something like Firmly. Inventory, it could be Deer and Unleashed. On the accounting side, it could be QuickBooks Online, Xero, SAP, NetSuite, Microsoft Dynamics. Hardware side, it could be things like Senos, OFS, Firmicraft, Plato, Rotec. On the point of sale side, GoTab, Square, Clover, Arrived, Toast. These are all very department-specific point solutions. And at the same time, you also have full stack solutions that are really focused on the full brewery side. The way I want you to think about this from a full brewery side is that you're focused on key areas that look like purchasing of raw materials and inventory, production management, sales and demand planning, accounting integration, reporting and analysis. And again, this is designed to be very educational. So it could be anything like Beer 30, Ecos, Encompass Orchestra, Crafted ERP, Brew Ninja, Ollie, Vicinity. These are all different solutions that exist in the market. And the key here is, if you leave today, think about what you can do in terms of implementing at least one of these and getting away from all those paper logs, spreadsheets, whiteboards, things that may be around. And so what happens then is when you actually start looking at those solutions and requirements, you then have to look at what's the best combination for your brewery. No system will do 100% of the job that you need. That just does not exist, right? And so you have to look at combinations. You could do something like, hey, I'm going to get Beer 30 with QuickBooks Online for my accounting. I'm going to get the GoTab point of sale. And I'm going to get Senos or Plato sensors. Hey, I'm doing something like NetSuite for my accounting, and I'm going to use Beer 30 for process and quality. Or maybe you're using something like Encompass along with Beer 30. It doesn't matter. It's always about pick and choose, see what's needed for your business in order to make sure that everything goes as expected and you can actually get the best of all worlds. Because I can guarantee you that your QuickBooks Online accounting provider is probably not going to have the same level of robustness as your Senos sensor that's used on your tank. Completely different fields. And that's where it's really important to mix and match from a tech usage side. Number 4, understand the usability and impact across different departments and teams. This is what it means. How many employees are on each team? How many licenses do you need, right? Is the system that you're about to implement something that does unlimited licenses, or are they going to charge you per user? What are the user permissions available for each team member? Is the system mobile, tablet, laptop friendly? How will the team be entering in data, right? These all become critical pieces when you're really looking at that best practice in managing that tech usage at the brewery. From there, number 5, understand the onboarding timeline and process. What's the timeline for implementation? Is it hours? Is it weeks? Is it months? How long is this actually going to take you? What departments need to be involved in the onboarding? How does the data flow across departments? What types of trainings will be provided? Which existing systems need to be maintained during onboarding? Will you feel valued as a customer or just another number? This is so critical. Like, what does customer support look like? For example, on the Beer 30 side, we use WhatsApp with all of our customers. And honestly, with the average response time, about 80 to 90% of our tickets are responded to within 30 minutes, 95 within a matter of 90 minutes, right? So an hour and a half. That's the response time, and we pride ourselves on that because the goal is that every single brewery we work with is a partner of ours that's focused in on the actual implementation side. And what do the testimonials and reviews tell you about the support? Very critical, right? Do your own diligence between GoTab point of sale and other point of sale providers like Square or Toast. Understand what's happening with Senos, Plato, things like that, and do your diligence to understand just what other people in the industry are saying about the same systems. From there, define budget and understand the contract terms and conditions. What that really means is what's the total cost of this implementation going to look like, right? Is it something that's easily quantifiable, like things like licensing fees monthly, onboarding cost? Is it something less obvious, like how many hours is it going to take from the team to implement this? Think about that element of digital discipline, right? Coming back to our core concept today. If somebody is going to be spending hours and hours and hours to implement something, that's a part of the budget and part of what's happening in terms of the actual implementation side. What's the cost of licensing? What are the onboarding fees, additional training fees? What are the estimated hours of training and implementation? How does it impact headcount? Right? This is a really critical one for managing tech use. Are you going to need a new full-time admin? For example, if you're implementing NetSuite, yeah, you're going to need somebody full-time focused on NetSuite. But are you in a position where maybe you're implementing a different software where the ROI that you're going to get from that is actually going to let you remove one particular headcount, right? So those are all really key elements to understand from a headcount perspective as well. What are the terms of licensing? Month to month, multi-month, annual, multi-year, and then also looking at cancellation fees. So again, really important when it comes to that management of that tech use at the brewery. Number 7, calculating the ROI on the software. What's the break-even timeline for when the software pays for itself? That could be things like, what are the number of hours that an employee saves based on streamlining that process? What are the quality improvements and yield improvements that you can get from the data and the metrics of the software? Here's a great example, right? And you can use this with anything else that you have. Example, beer 30 less than a pint a day, daily shifty. Well, if it's $75 a month for tier 0, that's between 0 and 500 barrels brewed annually at the production suite. Divide that out by 30 days, 2 employees, that's $1.25 per day. At an hourly rate of $15 an hour, if they just save 5 minutes in the day, the ROI is met, right? So that's an example of how you actually look at the tech usage and managing that in order to make sure that your team is fully bought in on implementing this is actually going to save us money and actually have a very solid ROI. From there, focus on leadership and team buy-in, right? Make sure that the executive team and heads of each department are signed off on implementation. This is one of my core principles when we look at any sort of tech usage at a brewery. You never want to have what we call the waterfall effect. Let me give you this example. So let's say that your tanks in the bright tank aren't packaged out in real time in Beer 30 or a software. Well, if those bright tanks aren't emptied, the filter team can't do their job of entering in the data that empties out the fermentation vessels. Well, if the FVs are full, then the brewing team can't actually brew into those FVs, right? So we're in this loop and pattern where the waterfall effect, hey, I can't use my software because the bright tanks are full. In the reality, in the real world, no, they were already packaged off. They're empty. They've been sitting empty, but the packaging manager was not bought in on utilizing a software system. So they stop entering in data real time. If they stop entering real time, hey, in the real world, the filter team or the transfer team is moving beer, can't track that. So then the brewing team can't brew. This is that waterfall effect that is so critical when you're looking at that digital discipline at your brewery. This is also the biggest cause of failure for a project like a brewery management system. And this is where you want to make sure that are your team members ready to operate with the tools that they have. I'll give some examples here in a moment, but that looks honestly things like, hey, do we have iPads? Do we have cell phones? Do we have sources for them? Are we paying for their cell phone subscription? Are we doing things like that to make sure that they feel like, yeah, my brewery is giving me the tools to actually go ahead and execute upon this. From there, number 9, go live date timeline for training and implementation. Set a go live date that works for all relevant team members and build out a timeline for milestones. Build a go live checklist. This is an example of the one that I love showing to people that are getting started with a software system. You want to predefine your recipes. You want to do an updated inventory count and stock take. That's everything for ingredients, grains, hops, adjuncts, teas, package supplies, finished goods, work in process for tanks. That can be things like recipe, volume, brew data, brew dates. What day did I brew this, and what was the cost of the beer in tanks? Chart of accounts for balance sheet and accounting, getting into vendor and customer lists, and getting into distribution price sheets, right? And so this is where it becomes so critical to actually go forwards with a project that's focused in on go live, let's implement technology use at our brewery. And what I like showing with this is here's some examples of tech usage, right? It could be that you have an iPad with a waterproof case. Maybe you have a TV with some tanks that are showing up based on a dashboard. In the brewer's office, so many people have that big whiteboard. Replace that with a TV, right? That gets them actively engaged with, I want to use the software because I'm seeing the impact of that. Maybe it's on their cell phone on brew day itself, right? That can be a tricky one because then they're using their own device, or potentially something happens from the overall cell phone plan. So it could be that you have work phones or work iPads. And it could also be that you have computers in the production area. So there's a lot of different ways to utilize tech at the brewery. And this is where that digital discipline becomes so critical, because if your brewers actively see what they're doing, they're able to then utilize that on a day-by-day basis. Let's keep going. The final piece, make SOP changes, celebrate project wins, and ingrain usage into culture. That means set the SOPs for software and tech usage. Excuse me. From there, getting into committing to use the system real time, have internal KPIs to see how the software helps, align workflows between real world brewing and the software that you're using, ask your employees for feedback on what they like or dislike about the system, celebrate the wins and milestones, and reach out to your service provider and give them feedback and ask for more training and support, right? That's one of the key things about implementing any sort of tech usage. It could be brewery software, it could be a new point of sale, it could be new hardware sensors. This workflow and these pieces are designed to really make sure that people get that feeling of how do I take ownership of using my cell phone, iPad, etc. at the brewery in order to accomplish what I need. So with that, I'm going to open it up for any questions. If there are any, feel free to throw them in the chat, be able to go from there. Cool. I got one question coming in. Do you have any strategies to work around or get teams on board for change if they're resistant? That's a great question. A lot of the times when that comes up, I like actually diving in on what's the resistance coming from. Is there resistance coming from the idea, for example, hey, now there's going to be an actual visibility for the boss, for the owner, for the manager to actually start seeing where I'm slacking. So if I'm slacking, oh shit, there's going to be a red target on my back now of these KPIs. Then it's about understanding and really empathizing with them of, hey, what are you resistant about with this? Why do you not want this software being implemented? What's the holdup? Some of the other objections that we see when it comes to this is the head brewer may say something like, I've been doing this on paper logs, whiteboard spreadsheets. I'm good. I don't need something like this. Okay, that's fair. You don't. But a business is much bigger than just one person. At that point, you're getting into the one bus problem where if something happens to that one individual that has everything in their mind, all of a sudden, if something happens to them, your recipes are gone, your data is gone, nobody knows how to use those systems, right? And so that's like one approach in terms of the root cause analysis. The other strategy I like talking about is how can you incentivize them to use it, right? That's really where, if we go back a couple slides, that's really where that aspect of the team buy-in comes in of, hey, what do we actually have in terms of KPIs that show success? We have some customers that we work with that will actually have beer loss as a target, right? And that beer loss target as a KPI indicates, hey, if you get your beer loss down to X percentage and we have more cases going out, that ties in with your bonuses, right? So those are strategies, I think, both sides of that, of being able to actively work on why are you resistant, and then getting into aspects of incentivizing somebody on the other side to actually use more of those systems. Great question. Thank you for bringing that up. Cool. So with that in mind, I'm going to transition into another part of digital discipline, which is actively looking at streamlining profitability using data. So this is where, for me, the thought process comes. We're all utilizing and tracking data. You're sitting here because you're implementing something like this. Well, what can we do to actually showcase data equals profitability, right? So let's actually dive on this. When it comes to a brewery's health, the way I think about it is that there's three key variables: quality, efficiency, and sales. And in general, in present day, complacency kills a brewery. It kills a business. There are so many factors, but these three, I think, are the most critical when it comes to tech usage and data and what happens next. Quality. You got to keep your customers happy. You make bad beer, you make shitty product, the person is just going to go down to another brewery down the road, and you've probably lost a customer forever. We've all experienced that. We visit a brewery, we're super excited. All of a sudden, the beer's not that great. You're like, I don't want to go back to that brewery. You got to keep your customers happy. Efficiency, more output in the same time, right? We're in a space right now where it's so important that cash flow is always important, but even more so now, where a lot of breweries aren't able to get a new tank. They're not able to get more capacity, or they're not able to get more packaging equipment. So you need to be in a position to get more output in the same time by being more efficient. And then finally, on the sales side, looking at ways to grow those profit margins, right? At the end of the day, you can make the world's best beer, objectively speaking, gold medals, et cetera, et cetera. If it either costs way more than what the market is willing to pay for it, or you can't sell it, you're not growing your profit margins. And you're in a position where you're actually losing more money for every single case that you're making. We've actually had that in one of the case studies that we've done in the past with a customer, of how the actual cost of goods were more than what their sale price was, leading to issues associated with the actual profit margins. So again, that's where a brewery's health, quality, efficiency, sales is so critical. So with that in mind, how do I use tech data to make profit? Well, again, this is all about best practices in digital discipline. So data-driven decisions are those key areas of profit analysis. There are things like executive summaries, process optimization, quality control, optimizing inventory, such as demand planning, material resource planning, ingredients, getting into cost of goods sold and COGS, sales and distribution, time savings across the team, and the overall focus really comes down to brewing more, brewing better. Brew more, brew better. And so we're actually going to dive in on these 7 areas, because this is how you get those best practices. For the question that was asked, when you show your team on how the data is being utilized to actually make a profit, get bonuses, get those pieces, now you're in a position where your tech usage all revolves around the data side of things, actually tying in with tangible benefits to the business and to an employee. So let's go to number 1, executive summary. The way I think about this, start assessing what's happening in the last 4 weeks and the last 13 weeks. An executive summary is that dashboard that gives you everything you need at that push of a button. it needs to have things like sales, gross margins, brew volume, pack volume, and beer loss, along with COGS per barrel. These six variables are needed by every single brewery, and the only way you get that is good data hygiene. The only way you get good data hygiene is by having digital discipline. So this is how it all circles back and ties in together from an executive summary perspective. From there, process optimization. Improve and control the brew to package yield. What that means is that the results end up being an increased output per batch. You're reducing your COGS per barrel, hectoliter to liter because, well, you have more beer that's going out the door and packaged. And really, you're looking at tracking these charts and variances in four key areas: brewhouse yield, filtration transfer yield, packaging yield, and the overall brew to package yield, the overall loss. And this type of throughput loss analysis, you should be doing on a weekly basis, right? This is where you start off weekly, start doing troubleshooting, then getting into monthly, quarterly, annually. Hey, what happened with the number of barrels I brewed, the number of barrels transferred, the number of barrels packaged, those losses in between, and the overall loss from brew to package, because that's what gives you the story of how successful your overall teams are being. This also comes in where if the team isn't putting in the data correctly, you're not going to have profitable information available to you. For process optimization, we also look at minimizing tank turn times. This could be things like, hey, I actually want to look at increasing my overall fermentation cellar capacity. That is the best way to eliminate the need for actually investing in additional tanks. That also means analyze and understand key fermentation metrics for cellar schedules, streamlining recipe variations in the fermentation trends, daily gravity, daily pH, temperature, VDK, all pieces that tie in from a process optimization side. Again, from a data management perspective, tank utilization and tank capacity, visually seeing something like this allows you to understand that your team is actually keeping the tanks as full and often as possible. So again, really tying in with that digital discipline and the managing tech side of things. Number 3, quality control. Real-time alerts and sign-off at every step of the process is so critical. This is how you motivate your team for using tech at the brewery. You want to mitigate costly production mistakes before they move further down the process. And as part of the best practices I would always recommend for tech, you want 3 sign-offs for beer: brew finish, ready to filter or transfer, ready to package. The last thing you want is saying, oh, somebody hasn't actually looked if the beer is ready for packaging. It goes into packages, and all of a sudden now you're doing a recall because somebody missed that sign-off step. Right? This is that aspect of managing tech usage where when you can showcase the impact of it, this becomes so much more powerful from a quality perspective. And what you want to do is you want to start trending out the data visually. One of the best practices of managing tech, show people things visually. We are all, majority of us are visual learners. So being in a position where, hey, if I'm on my brew day and I have my brew sheet in front of me, I want to be able to set those target tolerances. Look at that like orange circle, orange square that's there, rectangle. You want to be able to set tolerances for each critical brew spec. You want the user to have that instant feedback in traffic light signals that we know. Hey, green, good. Yellow, red, bad. You're deviating so much from the targets. That becomes a really good way to get those proactive validations happening. And again, getting those real-time alerts that can be done via text or email. That's how you utilize tech correctly at a brewery. You're getting those real-time texts and emails that then showcase the value of the data that's present. From there, in the fermentation side, very similar concept. Let's look at my gravities, right? And on those gravities, let's make sure we also look at temperatures and set points. How is that happening with tank sheets? And the best way that I recommend from a tech usage side is graph out those metrics, right? It could be on things like graph paper as an example, if you're going a bit old school, but the idea here is managing tech usage. So with that, actually get into visualizing each batch on top of one another. So this is where, for example, the predictive analysis gravity side, allows you to actually see how those gravities are going daily. And you can see for these 6 batches, that spread is so tight. 1069, we're constantly hitting our gravity targets. Now, if I were to look at something like predictive analysis on the pH side, I can see that there's a wide spread going from 5.1 to 5.9 for pH. And we all know that beer pH is a flavor number for beer, right? Effectively, if there's something going wrong with water chemistry, one of our customers utilized this from a pH side to understand that the water profile from the city was changing. That then ties in on this predictive analysis piece and how you have to fix it. So again, tying in with utilizing the information in front of you to really understand what's going on from a day-by-day basis. Next up, quality control. Yeast. Using technology, track the yeast genealogy from batch to batch. This helps you maximize the repitching of generations and corresponding minimizing fresh pitch cost. That also allows you to then utilize yeast as part of your cost of goods sold. Right? If I had a particular initial yeast that I used that I bought from Lallemand, Fermentis, White Lab, my first strain, now I can say, cool, I bought that for $100. I can track this out to see, well, that initial batch from repitching, harvesting, repitching is now being used in this tree diagram up to 7 layers. Now that $100 cost is divided up by 7, right? So that cost per batch is actually very different than it was just $100. So this is where tracking it based on brand and batch, harvesting and repitching, and utilizing that to actually get data, but more importantly, also from a quality side. If I can visually see what's going on, like these green genealogy pieces, I then know that, hey, if I harvested from a particular tank and there's a quality issue, if I were to repitch that into my other tanks, that could lead to an outbreak or that could lead to actual beer going down the drain. So this is where the quality side becomes so critical. Moving on, optimizing inventory. This is where you need to understand the concept of demand planning driving material resource planning. This ties in with developing just-in-time purchasing processes for raw materials and packaging supplies, which then result in minimizing cash and warehouse space tied up in excess inventory, minimizing losses due to expiration of raw materials, and minimizing losses due to packaging materials that get phased out. The last thing you want is a bunch of product, whether it's raw materials, packaging supplies, even finished products, just sitting on a shelf somewhere, not being able to be utilized. And this is where that tech side ends up helping in terms of showcasing the value from an ROI side. So with demand planning, really having 3 layers associated with it. Sales forecast, production forecast, and demand report. Those brew subsets then feed into your material resource planning. And again, for any tech usage, it could be an ERP system, it could be something like Beer 30, or it could be something like a spreadsheet. It doesn't matter. The key is actually utilizing the information to, again, have that digital discipline to understand what's happening from the actual data sets available. From there, material resource planning. Making accurate purchase decisions to ensure operations keep running smoothly while keeping cash flow in check. Right? One of the worst experiences we all have. You're about to start brewing. You're about to mash in. Oh, crap, I don't have my particular ingredient on hand, whether it's hop, churro, whatever else, citra, mosaic. I don't have that on hand. Well, that can be avoided using the best practices of I'm going to plan out my particular tanks and the brews that are happening in order to make sure I have the inventory on hand at the beginning. That then leads to understanding, hey, which ingredients can I substitute? Right? This visualization of the raw materials and packaging usage really showcases if I'm out of a particular ingredient, can I substitute something else in? And also the mindset of what's the overall impact on my core beers versus my one-off beers? So again, a really good way to understand what's happening from a packaging and raw material perspective. Moving on, cost of goods sold. Use the data to calculate exact cost of goods sold for each brand and packaging type. This is critical. If you're watching this webinar, one of the key takeaways I really want you to have you need to have visibility into profitability for each SKU that your brewery sells. With each of those SKUs, you need to understand if there's a high cost or an opportunity to reduce costs with recipe optimization. Maybe adjust the prices to ensure an active margin. And it's so vital to actually track those costs of goods from batch to batch, identifying shifts that are happening over time, and really adapting purchasing, operations, and pricing strategies. Make sure to look at the variance that's happening percentage-wise from the target COGS to actual. Right? This is the fundamental piece of how tech helps with this, is that it's giving you those pieces of actually looking at your target COGS and your actual COGS. So let's break that down further. From a process improvement side for costs, you can see here an example of batch history. What I'm now able to see is, hey, I'm able to use the batch costs as efficiency metrics. This is things like my grains, my hops and adjuncts, my yeast, my package supplies, labor, rentals, and more importantly, remembering to include the final landed cost of items. This could be things like shipping. This could be things like taxes, depending on what part of the world you're in and how tax law works. In particular, if I was really poor on my material resource planning and I had to overnight grain or hops or things, that entire shipping needs to be a part of the cost for that beer in order to make sure we understand, hey, there was an issue that was so much more expensive because I had poor planning. That's where tech usage becomes so critical. This then leads to things like COGS per batch, kegs, bottles, cans, really being able to break down each batch by SKU and including losses, getting into a spot where you're looking at COGS per brand. So the same brand with different batch numbers, and really to start comparing batches over time. That could be your lager versus your double hop IPA, and you're going to see that over time, the batches are going to vary. And as you start looking at that variation, getting into the cost of goods variance reports is so critical for profitability. Being able to say that my 24 pack has a target cost of $8.50, but my actual for building that cost me $12, that's a huge variance that's present. And that's how you're then able to understand what the actual variances are between targets and actuals. From there, one step further, cost of goods sold per unit of measurement, right? Again, visual people require visually breaking down how those targets and actuals are trending over time. So you can see this gray line versus the orange line, and hey, some of it's good, some of it's really bad. This allows you to start seeing outliers, and for those variance reviews, again, as an example, in this command center view, being able to start seeing that I have my band of averages, anything above 1.5 or below 1.5 standard deviation is an outlier. That could be red or green. This then helps you understand those COGS variances. And again, it's that data and the best practices of that digital discipline that lets that keep going. From there, let's talk about sales and distribution. Real-time brewery inventory and stock numbers are critical. Exactly what and when beers are available, when are they coming out of the tank, what's happening with labels, making sure that the production timeline is set in advance so that way your team never misses a sales opportunity. You don't want to be in a position where you have a tap handle, you have space on a shelf, and all of a sudden, hey, your team can't actually make the production happen to meet those needs and those dates. Not good for anybody. So that's where you minimize your overcommitments and back orders, and you really focus in on aspects like transitions between seasonal and limited releases. So again, sales and distro is so critical when it comes to the profitability side and how tech usage helps solve that. From there, on a quality control traceability side, batch traceability, right? Knowing what's happening for my hops here in case there is a product recall. What are the lot numbers? What was happening from a certificate of analysis for the two-row that I got versus the Mosaic versus the Cascade for the different vendors? This same aspect also applies for packaging supplies. Maybe you had a vendor that had an issue with your can lids, and that led to can seaming issues that led to an uptick in DO. Well, from a traceability side, if you know all the batches that were impacted, you can then make a claim with your provider to say, hey, all those batches I had to recall, that's exactly on you. Again, that's where that digital discipline becomes so critical on what's needed. From there, product traceability ties in with true traceability. This is one of my favorite circular graphs, right? Circular diagrams. Scheduling and tasks leads to raw materials and yeast, leads to material traceability, packaging supplies, batch costs, which leads to distribution and sales, sales traceability, tracking of where your kegs are, and with that batch history and product recall, in order to understand the growth strategy that's there. As you get to that spot where you're looking at, hey, we're going to start doing self distro and expand that out, or working with distributors, that growth strategy becomes so critical because as the footprint grows, there's so many issues that can tie with operations and quality. So kind of continuing on this path of distribution, being in a position of having batch codes in cold box and warehouses, again, having that traceability where you know exactly how many quantities of batch 10 versus 11 versus 12 exist for a particular beer. Getting to a spot where on a sales order, you're actively incorporating the batch number that's put onto the truck and adding those on from a product recall perspective and knowing where each brand and batch was sold. With that, when you have something like traceability, getting into aging reports via cost of goods sold, how old is my inventory? What does my team need to sell next? Right? If you have your phenomenal hazy IPA or red hop IPA that's been sitting in the cold room for 120 days, that's probably an issue, right? And so this is where getting it by cost of goods is so critical. And the same thing, aging report by count. As you can see here, you have like your victory stout that's been sitting on hand for more than 180 days. That's great. And right now, your hazy IPA is still in that 0 to 30 range. Your brown sugar ale, 0 to 30 range. Again, visualizations help you see just what needs to be sold next. And from there, putting it all together for a sales summary. This is where you then start comparing different periods of time. And you really want to look at your sales in terms of multiple visual data sets. So from this command center report, what you can see is we're able to slice the data where I now have brand performance. I have item type performance, right? Is it bottles, cans, kegs? Understanding the breakdown that ties in with the different companies that are present, the sales reps, and the gross margins, right? If you understand that, hey, my 16 ounce versus my 12 ounce cans have different margins and have different performance, that lets you then make those informed decisions. The only way you get this particular type of data set is by actually following through on that digital discipline for tech usage at the brewery. From there, the final piece, time savings across the team. If you're using data correctly and if you're managing your tech usage, you're really consolidating those 7 to 15 spreadsheets, paper sheets, email digests into a central source of truth. You're using brewery software pivot tables with interconnected sheets, task management, real-time alerts, getting into pre-built sheets for tax reporting. If it's taking you more than 5 minutes to do your excise tax or your TTB reports, that's a waste of time. There's systems out there that can easily do that within minutes. And more importantly, avoiding redundancies, right? Those time savings are so critical when it comes to the actual best practices for managing usage at a brewery. So with that, if there's any more questions from the audience, feel free to throw that in. Let's have a conversation, right? If you want, feel free to, I'll have my email at the end of this. Feel free to talk about successes, failures, growth opportunities as well. One more question coming in. With new AI app builders like Lovable coming into the market, how do you see those fitting into brewery tech stacks? That's a great question from the audience. And the best way I would actually describe that is you want to see how the different systems you have use things like APIs, right? APIs are application programming interfaces, effectively ways for you to be able to extract that data and do something more meaningful with it in a separate setup. So that could be using Lovable, Claude, Codex, anything else. And just so happens that we actually have our Beer 30 API ready to go as part of our ecosystem to actually take out those particular data points and build those into the actual market itself. So great question. Thank you for asking that. Happy to chat more about it. If you want, shoot me an email, pk@thefifthingredient.com. Visit the website, connect with me on LinkedIn, and also our social media handles are available as well. Thank you for attending. Over to you, Aaron.
Excellent, Pulkit. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for everybody who is able to be here live or who is watching this after the fact. As always, you can find not only this, but all of our webinars on the Craft University Google Drive. And keep an eye out for next month, where on May 27th at 3 p.m. Eastern, we are going to be talking to a panel about multiple locations, something that's on the mind of the entire industry these last couple of years. That's go forth and multiply. And I'll even tease you with our first guest. It's going to be Doug Cunningham, former of Denver Beer Company, now of Crafted Ledgers, who has worked with some of the largest multi locations across the country and helped them manage their operations, both large and small. Look forward to seeing you all there. And as always, reach out if there's anything at all that we can do for you. And check out our Facebook group, Craft University Community, where we have plenty of room for conversation, being able to trade tips, tricks, ways of doing things, best practices, and all the things that really make this community what it is. Cheers, everyone, and have an excellent day.
Cheers, everyone. Cheers. Thank you.